Hi, thanks for tuning in to our Practical Nerds weekly podcast. I'm Shub, and together with my partner and co host Patric, we normally invest in founders in design, construction, renovation, and logistics technology. Many of our friends in the ecosystem wanted us to start a podcast on the built world, and in return, we decided to honor their request with a show about nothing at all. Patrick, what's really gutsy is when I recorded that intro almost 2 years ago,
Yeah,
I had the foresight to say that Practical Nerds is a weekly podcast, and finally in the year 2025, I think we've nailed it. We actually have an episode going every single week. I don't think we could say that for ourselves in 23 or 24. I think we were doing decent, I'd say. Every maybe 2 episodes every 3 weeks or
yeah,
thereabouts. But I think now we've really hit our stride.
yeah, I think so too. I mean, you're right. It was about 30, 35 per year in the
Hmm.
first 2 years, and right now, the first quarter, we're going nicely, almost
Yeah,
a weekly cadence, with
indeed.
some exceptions that perhaps occur due to travel. So that's pretty nice. And so for today, Shub, you and I were just discussing. Hey, there was an interesting phone call I
Hmm.
got today, and which turned into an hour-long conversation with a portfolio founder of ours, which was really interesting, was really thought-provoking, and I want to share about that conversation. I want to tell you and the listeners the anecdote, what we discussed, because I think it's very reflective in the life of a startup CEO that goes through the same kinds of questions.
Hmm.
I want to reveal what I told that person, and then we're debating. You are going to debate live with me whether the
Hmm.
things I actually told him make sense, or maybe I also gave him the wrong kind of input. And then you
Uh-huh.
might correct me on the record, and I'll send him the episode afterwards.
Love it.
Cool. Before I go there, just for context, Shub, for everyone, how do you oftentimes work with your founders? Do you get phone calls a lot? Do you get on spontaneous phone calls? I think you mentioned on one of the Practical Nets episodes that you even morph into a life coach sometimes or a
Yeah.
psychologist. What's your modus operandi with founders?
Yeah, so look, it evolves a little bit, and I think it's definitely not a one size fits all approach. And I think neither do you offer a one size fits all approach, Patrick, to the portfolio founders you work with. If it's very early company, pre-seed or seed stage, what it tends to be is apart from more structured interactions, it is completely ad hoc, quite often unpredictable. They may reach out wanting to talk about all sorts of things. And then it's usually when they reach out, typically over WhatsApp, we speak shortly thereafter. Uh, those conversations can last from anywhere from a few minutes up to an hour or two, right? So that happens as well. Many a time, so my preferred style is to not jump into the role of an expert or some sort of a person who can be an operational guide to the business. From time to time, I do play that role, but it's not a role that I prefer starting off as
Hmm.
in my role as an investor. I tend to play the role, or I tend to enjoy, I should say, playing the role more of someone who can say, "Hey, you know what? This is what I've observed. So probabilistically, this is what you should be doing if you want to increase your odds of success. Or this is what I've also observed not working well. So if you stay on this path, this is how your odds of success decrease." And
Hmm.
that's the sort of messaging with anecdotes, examples that I like to give. Um, I do also from time to time enjoy being, as you rightly said, a life coach. And what I've noticed, especially when companies scale up and uh, they've sort of figured out at least how a business is supposed to repeat itself at some scale, the bottlenecks at a founder level become of a different kind. And therefore, you need to solve more specific bottlenecks for what is demanding of a CEO or a founder's time. And
Aha.
I enjoy playing that role as well. So, our portfolio founders or prospective portfolio founders, if that's who you're looking for, I'm happy to play that role with you as well.
I mean, it's a perfect segue that you are launching me off of, because the latter is what happened to me
Hmm.
today as well. My cadence with founders tends to be a mix of planned and ad hoc, but it's always because the founders pull. I think you coined the term for us that, hey, we're the first founders call and not the first to call founders.
Yes.
And it's a similar experience between the founders that I work with and myself. The structured cadence oftentimes is a monthly. But the more interesting meeting, and that is important because you stay updated. You take information, not because I needed to report. I own this business just like you. I have no one to report to other than you.
Yeah.
The financial performance to
And
our
likewise.
LPs, but
Yeah.
how we operate, we report to each other. So that's not the incentive, but it is to connect information to then help founders anticipate things or to see opportunities or be it partnerships, learnings from other markets, etc. And for that, I need information. And for that, a continuous stream of interaction is important. But actually, the interesting discussions usually happen unplanned, ad hoc, because something happens in the business, something happens in the market, something, some connection in my mind gets formed. And then, it's these WhatsApp triggered conversations that catch your attention, or a founder calls you directly, and then that happens a lot. And that's what happened today too. So I spoke with a founder with whom we're invested for a while, but not yet many, many years. That
Okay.
founder is growing very fast, very quickly. It doesn't matter which space it is, but he's operating in a European market that gets very fast demand, and he has a very non-obvious opportunity and take. He comes from a background of companies that were super well operated, super well standardized. His most recent stint was with a unicorn, where he developed a business for that unicorn, and then used that experience to formulate his own thesis on something he wanted to found. So that's his background. Also, actually neurodiverse founder. So very interesting
Okay.
just from an information processing and decision-making perspective, something that I've really enjoyed. Okay, so we're on the phone and he asks me, which I think is reflective of many CEOs as they earn their successes and with that begin to gain confidence in what they're doing and thinking bigger then. That's where he was. And he asked me, hey, Patric, I have a feeling that the core business is now running. It's on the rail tracks and I need to obviously stay on top of it. But I feel like I can free up bandwidth on my end in order to do other things. And I'm thinking about this grander vision. I'm thinking about that opportunity, and perhaps I should pursue this. And he's like spilling with ideas. And and by the way, he's behind the steering wheel on a 4-hour car drive. So he has time, right? And so he's spilling these ideas. And I'm thinking to myself, and by the way, all of these ideas, they were not random bullshitted brainstorm. You could sense this was, he was thinking last night about these things for many, many hours, but still he hasn't acquired a lot of primary information. So he uses me as a sounding board and I tell him, hey, look, about the ideas, I don't have your information. So I probably can't help you with the ideas. So what do you want from me? He said, actually, I don't want your input on the ideas. That's something for me to figure out. But should I be using my bandwidth for these things? That's how he then boiled down the question, because I feel like my job is transforming right now. And now that then morphed into his real question, should I be doing these things and how should I think about my job as the CEO of this company? Great. So I gave him 3 answers, Shub, and I want to discuss with you these 3 answers.
Okay.
And keep in mind, I was doing this on the spot. I'm sure I'll find a 4th answer if I get the chance to think deeper, but they come from a place of experience, from conviction, from first principle thinking over my years of doing this job. The first, I said, your job is to hire exceptional people and organize them exceptionally. I'll explain why I said that. Let me first tell you the 3 things. So that's 1.
Okay.
2, I said your job is to acquire primary information and use it to make prime decisions. Primary information, what your customers, primary information is what do your customers think of you? What do they do with your product? How is the process with them? And primary information is what does your operations team in building and delivering your product do? So you need to acquire that primary information without filtering in between to make prime decisions. That's the second CEO job as your company grows and scales and keeps morphing into something bigger. And the third thing is you need to make bold bets. So these are the three things. I said you need to hire exceptional people, organize them exceptionally. Second,
Yes.
you need to acquire prime information to make prime decisions. And third, you need to make bold bets. I can elaborate on any of these, but how does this just, I've been setting the stage here. How do these resonate with you in the context of the job of the founder and how it changes over the time of a company?
I think it's spot on, I would say. I think it aligns very well with what I think founders should be focused on.
So perhaps pick one of these and what does it mean in your mind when you hear me say this?
So maybe we could start, with the second one on, I guess, having primary information, primary knowledge. I think the way, and I think of it as also being, actually, you know what, let's stick with the second one, because I think it relates a lot with a topic we also discussed in an earlier episode on execution modes and how businesses can keep compounding on themselves. And in that episode, we argued that only happens if you're fully aware of your bottlenecks, have very granular idea of targets, how to get from one point to the other, and know what could get in the way of you going from point A to point B to point C, etc. Actually, you know what? Random factoid, which I hope checks out. So for fact checkers, correct us if I'm not right. It just came up in my mind. Do you know, Patrick, that if you take liquid water at 0 degrees and you heat it to 100 degrees, right?
Sorry, at what air pressure?
Let's take ambient pressure, right? Ambient pressure at sea level, let's say, right?
Okay.
So you take liquid water at 0 degrees, you heat it to, again, water at 100 degrees Celsius. The amount of energy that you need to do that, that is just a fifth of the energy needed to boil that water from 100 degrees to create water vapor or steam at 100 degrees.
Interesting.
Right? So in other words, you need 5 times as much energy just to boil water, to take it from 100 degrees, water at 100 degrees to steam at 100 degrees. Then it took to heat the water from 0 to 100 degrees.
I did not know that.
That is quite crazy, right? When you put it like that.
Thermodynamics. Right? I'm not an engineer, as you can tell.
Or I guess to make it even more technical, change of phase is more energy consuming or demands more energy than just change of temperature in the same state. And the reason I bored you with this...
Unless I do that on Mount Everest.
I think the ratios would change then, but perhaps the argument would still stand, right? But you're right. But you're right. The water would vaporize more easily there.
Yeah.
All right. But the reason I thought of this in a completely ad hoc sense in this point, what I was trying to say is, you may have done a few things to get up to a certain point in your journey, but you can't expect it to take the same amount of effort or for you to employ the same methods and just repeat them and expect a similarly proportionate result. You need to be constantly on the lookout for better ways and more efficient ways. And perhaps even when you look for efficient ways, you still need to put in more to get the next result.
Brilliant metaphor.
I hope the 5x still holds, but hopefully the message still stands. Again, we'll get corrected by someone that, hey, it's not 5 times, it's something else.
Actually, with that metaphor, I think the metaphor applies perfectly to my first point. So maybe let's start with the first and not with the second. So my first point that I said to the CEO was, hey, you need to hire exceptional people and organize them exceptionally. And there are 2 factors here. So the hiring exceptional people sounds very intuitive to everyone, but it can actually be very tricky. I have portfolio companies. Separate anecdote. 2 months ago, I was on a board meeting with a post-Series A company, raised money from, I think, a terrific fitting investor, lots of success, huge funds, also a big brand name, but you know my stance, the brand name typically doesn't say something about the quality, but here the 2 people on the board from them are really, really good for this company. And the founder was walking through the hiring pipeline and
Mm-hmm.
was also, it's become clear in that company at that point in time, it's better now, but at that point in time, that the company, the CEO was stretched completely thin, like managing too many people, making sure that everywhere the departments were running properly, that
Mm.
people were on top of things, the quality was great, and it was a clear bottleneck, right? And
Mm.
even he himself was realizing that he was the bottleneck. Now he hasn't realized what was the root cause. And I said in that board meeting, sir, you don't know what exceptional people look like yet.
Mm.
He didn't immediately understand, because in his mind, everybody that he had hired was exceptional. The
Mm.
problem is it's a self-reinforcing cycle. Unless you see exceptionalism, you don't know how to hire exceptionalism.
Yes.
And I said on that board meeting, you have to get one and then the next one truly exceptional, game-changing people that are representative of what world-class excellence looks like on
Mm-hmm.
the team. And then all of a sudden you will notice that it becomes easier to hire people of that caliber more and more, not just because they
Mm.
attract them, not just because they might know them, but because you actually now know what excellence looks like. And the two investors from that other fund that I respect a lot and that I've seen a lot, they said, I 1000% agree. That's
Mm.
what we need to do.
Mm.
Now, back to the role of the CEO. That's sometimes the problem. CEOs, founders will intuitively agree, yes, of course, I need to hire exceptional people. But sometimes it's the unknown that you
Mm.
don't even know. You don't realize that you don't even know what exceptional and excellent
Yes.
looks like. That's my first point. The second point is then to organize them exceptionally. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
something that I see only the very, 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 very best companies that I have worked with, and that might be two,
Mm.
truly understand in their journey that they need to find an organizational model that allows them to run a core business extremely profitably, but also to set their company up for something grander, for change, for constant morphing, for making big bets,
Mm-hmm.
etc. And that organization might change a lot. In Revolut's case, I know that from a mutual friend that
Okay.
is a big fan of Revolut, early investor of Revolut, and he's sharing experiences. It's not primary information for me. I'm not involved with that company. Never spoke to Nick, the CEO. But the anecdotes that he's been sharing is that, hey, Revolut kills all the other neobanks. Sorry, he doesn't say killed. Outpaces all the other neobanks because they have an insane shipping velocity. And that's a result of how the CEO set up the company organizationally. I've
Mm.
seen the same thing in two of my portfolio companies. It makes a huge difference. So for
Mm.
me, when you make the metaphor of the phase change and the amount of
Yeah.
energy that it needs, that's what comes to my mind. You need exceptional people, and you need to organize them in a way that you can truly morph your company into something bigger. And I see almost no company ever do it.
Yeah. Firstly, I agree. I think the metaphor or example does indeed better fit with the first one. I hadn't even, first point that you made, I hadn't even realized that. Now I'm thinking in my mind, of the reasons why some of these things may be happening, especially that people don't identify or hire exceptional people. Because I think every venture-backed company wants to always say that we hire A players or A plus
Yeah.
players. Do you think there's a case that they feel some sort of pressure that they need to hire very quickly or need to show success in hiring, and therefore, quite often, unfortunately, they end up optimizing for folks they can get in order to show progress and traction with hiring?
I do think that can be a contributing factor, but
Mm-hmm.
I have second and third time founders
Mm-hmm.
who would tell you they realize that, go slow to go fast, or hire slow, fire fast, these
Mm.
mantras that they have learned through their
Yeah.
experience. And yet among them, you will have founders that, in spite of realizing that and doing it that way, they will not build excellence in the highest sense.
Mm.
And I think the bigger contributor, by my experience, is that you don't realize when what excellence truly looks like. And
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the big benefits of being in a startup ecosystem or the startup ecosystem like Silicon Valley. If you network well, if you spend time there, eventually you will be able to have seen all sorts of quality, and that gives you a spectrum to
Yes.
compare with. Now, it's not in a cafe or in a whatever. You need to see people interact on a business basis to truly see it, right? Or on a work basis. But if you do that long enough and you build up a spectrum or Palantir, right? I mean, I imagine, again, I've not worked at Palantir, but I imagine if you work in that company, you probably have a sense of what exceptional within that company looks like. And so how many more companies will have more exceptional people in that specific domain? Maybe Helsing from
Yeah.
Germany can make the same claim, right? But how many more? Not many, right? Whereas if I'm employee 10,000 in a cloud server company, maybe my benchmark of what exceptional is different, right? I think that's the bigger root cause is you need to find ways to expose yourself to excellence in order to have that benchmark on your spectrum. And then all of a sudden, the likelihood that you will create excellence in your company has become higher.
I could not agree more. I think it's also interesting, uh, especially running with your point of what many times firms don't know what exceptional means. I think the problem it may be much more acute in AEC tech or construction tech for all the reasons we've discussed before. Because I think in many firms, founders have this sort of generic sense of what constitutes like a high quality hire for a venture backed company without maybe giving adequate thought to whether such a person fits into the scheme of things or whether such a person fits into how your company specifically wants to scale. I'll give you an example, which may be very counterintuitive, but hopefully it still uh, conveys the point I'm trying to make. So in InfraMarket, obviously the founders themselves, there's some bit of industry background and so on. And when they started a few years in, they took the call that they will sort of be structured the way a conglomerate is, which is a highly
Great example.
unusual, right? A highly unusual decision to make as a venture-backed startup. And interestingly, the CEOs of each of the divisions of the conglomerate are folks who've been CXOs or CEOs of large publicly listed companies before.
30 years, 35 years of business experience.
Exactly, right? Which is a, so some may hear this and say, hey, how's that an exceptional hire? But what I'm trying to say is if your ambition is to create a conglomerate of similar but not the same kinds of businesses in different categories, perhaps you need to model yourself in the way large conglomerates are structured and with the right people. So maybe it's not such a good idea to staff it with techies all over the place,
Yes.
for example, right? And I thought, so, whether you buy the narrative that they are exceptional people or not, I think it's a terrific example of knowing how to put them in an exceptional way or to organize people in an exceptional way to
Yes.
unlock better results.
I mean, InfraMarket is a great example of the exceptional people organized exceptionally. And like you said, it changed over time. I mean, when we invested in InfraMarket, it was not a one-stop shop. It was
Correct.
not a house of brands. It was not a
Yeah.
well, it was a cloud manufacturer for 2 or 3 categories maybe, but
Yes.
in the making, right? And so at that point, you can organize yourself way differently. But now, as you make the bold bet into cloud manufacturing and you see the bold bet working out, the bold bet becomes your core. And now you have to think, okay, how do I scale this now? And how do I enable myself to make the next big bold bet,
Yes.
which is perhaps the house of brands? And for that, you need an organizational model that organizes exceptional people exceptionally well. And so that's what
Mm-hmm.
InfraMarket did. I have a fintech in my portfolio that is, Series A grade,
Mm-hmm.
makes, I would say for that stage, insane amount of revenue, but
Yeah.
still early days. I wouldn't compare it from the maturity to InfraMarket. Nevertheless, the founders, mid to late 30s, one sold
Mm-hmm.
another company, another one was a COO for a very large insurance business. They have this mindset to organize the company very early in an exceptional way. So the last chat I had with them a week ago was actually where they came to me. It was not even me triggering it, and said, hey, we're thinking about reorganizing. This is what we're thinking. What is your experience? And so the very fact that someone does that at that stage is a great example, and it almost never happens. Not in
Yeah.
construction tech, not in other startups. It's a very underrated skill for a CEO to think about how to exceptionally organize.
Absolutely.
What about, so I have an anecdote about acquiring prime information and then using that to make prime decisions, but perhaps you launch us off in this one. Like, what comes to your mind other than the phase metaphor?
So the interesting thing, right, just to connect from point one to point two, uh, what, and on a cautionary note, what I've also seen, and there may be folks listening to this podcast or this episode concluding that, hey, does this mean I stack my company up with great people and they do most of the work and then I can sit back and I guess take strategic calls, right? Which again, we may pretend that that doesn't happen. That happens way more often than we realize in venture, way too often, right? And I think that is a terrible manifestation of point one, Patric, and in a weird way that leads right into the opposite of what you suggested in point two. Because by doing that, the founder has removed themselves from the primary source of information, any sort of grounding to the reason they started the company, and then you sort of become more of a boss, just
Yeah.
randomly reacting to tactical stuff.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I'm on the record saying that one of the reasons why your investor should not be giving you input on almost all of your business decisions is because the founders are supposed to have 1,000 times more information and better information. But now,
Yes.
if you stop doing that, then actually you're becoming more like your investor. And that's setting you up not for prime decision making, right? One of the reasons, by the way, why I'm such a big fan of founder led sales in AEC. Because AEC in the end is an industry that, I'm not tired of saying it, quirky and edgy, and you tend to have edge cases a long time until you see all of a sudden how you can uniform or unify them.
Yeah.
For that, however, I need to work with my customers. So I'm not saying it's a CEO's job as their company morphs to do all the sales all the time. Of course, that wouldn't scale. That's obvious, but you need to do some. You need to be in some
Yes.
client relationships. You need to see some sales happening. In Enter, the CEO is actually the prime salesperson, but he has thought about how to organize his sales organization very, very quickly because he learned how to do that from another German, I think it's Unicorn, maybe it wasn't a McMakler,
Okay.
where he learned that from Hanno, the founder, and Lucas. So he thought very early about it. And to this day, he makes sure that he gets samples of sales calls, that he actually sits side by side to salespeople doing the sales because he's acquiring primary information about the customer reactions, but also how his operations work. And that sets you up for prime decision making because if you don't have those decisions, Shub, what happens in every organization that grows? Every organization under the planet, you do have middle management. It doesn't matter what you call them.
Yeah.
In the end, you have people filtering information. Some of them benevolently because they say, hey, the CEO needs to make a decision and I can't give him all the information that I have because that would be inefficient. So I need to
Yeah.
synthesize it. Oftentimes also not benevolently, malevolently, as in,
Yeah.
oh, I would look bad if I do this, so let me filter this
Exactly.
out, blah, blah, blah. So now you as a CEO are actually in the worst possible, sorry, you're not in the worst, but you're not the prime decision maker anymore. The decision was
Yes.
already made for you. It just gets presented to you in a filtered way, right?
Yeah.
That's poor. I think I might have shared this anecdote or this management practice. And I think it goes back to Jack Welch, actually. I'm not sure. I acquired it from another CEO of a large publicly listed company that I used to work directly for. But I think he got it from Jack Welch. So this CEO that I worked for made it a habit to be it was a manufacturing business, to be in the manufacturing sites 250 days a year, 80 different countries, huge amount of travel. And that CEO explained that principle to me that he said, look, if I sit in my headquarters, I will get management reports and they will be heavily filtered because people will report to me what they think I want to hear. It's basically whatever communist principle or fascist principle, but it's like information gets filtered. And now how do I make actually good capital allocation decisions? How do I allocate my capex? How do I decide where to replace a GM or not? etc. Okay, so then he said, now I travel to the countries. I said, okay, so now you're getting the prime information. He said, no, still not, because I will be received like a state delegation. So now the
Mm.
GM doesn't come to me. The GM basically, makes all this pompous effort in order to still create a PowerPoint presentation to tell me how he perceives the business, and it will still be filtered.
Yeah.
So Shub, what does he do? He actually, when he goes into the countries, first he goes onto the yard of the manufacturing site and he'll talk to the worker. Hey, what is going
Mm.
wrong here? He does that. I have seen him do
Mm.
that. So he cuts through the
Nice.
management layers to take prime information. And CEOs and startups need to do the exact same thing. It doesn't mean that CEO is running the manufacturing sites. It doesn't
Mm.
mean, he's doing the job of the GM. It just means he sample tests
Mm.
for acquiring primary information from customers and from operations. And I think that's exceptionally important. Jeff Bezos' principle, allegedly, I've never worked for Jeff, but allegedly, his principle was, when he was still acting CEO, not acting CEO,
Mm-hmm.
still CEO of Amazon, was, hey, my job is to make 3 great decisions
Mm.
today. Nothing else. I don't need to do
Yeah.
anything else. So once you have that mindset, it all becomes about information acquisition and processing.
Yes. 100%. By the way, what you said about, the CEO of the large publicly listed company visiting the yard, etc., it reminded me of another expression that you use, Patrick, which I resonate strongly with. The ability of founders to, I think you call it taking the elevator, if I'm not mistaken.
Riding the elevator. Yeah.
Riding, yeah. I like that as well. Being able to, go down to the grassroots, to the, in a very bottoms up approach if needed, but also have the ability to go high up to make big strategic decisions. It's a, it's a very difficult balancing act, and one actually very, very rare. Even in scaled up companies, I would say it's extremely rare.
Very, very, very rare.
Yeah.
And it's because the type of information changes, right? So in some you have like very, very granular nitty gritty information, and now you need to process them in a way that allows a very nitty gritty but important decision. And the other one is more abstract information. It's more conceptual information. It's more
Yes.
visionary. So that changes the type of processing that you need to do. And I think the most intelligent CEOs will still struggle with the two
Mm-hmm.
differences, because it's not an IQ question only. It is an
Mm-hmm.
IQ question, but it's also having routine in different forms of information processing and different thinking practices. That's a routine question as much as it is, and a repetition question as much as it is an IQ question.
Mm.
Yeah. But so that's, in my opinion, the second job of the CEO, especially as the company morphs. You need to still make sure that you acquire prime information in order to make prime decisions. Now, the third one is, I said, hey, you need to make bets boldly.
Yeah.
What comes to your mind from your experiences, perhaps, what does it mean to take bold bets boldly?
Look, I think the first thing that comes to mind, for better or worse, is like a pivot or some change of direction. Um,
I know what example you have in your mind from your current deal flow. Do you want to share it, or better not?
yeah, let's save it for
Okay.
another time. Um, what? Okay, I'm drawing a blank here. Maybe you could help me out a little bit.
What was the boldest bet that InfraMarket took? That when maybe in hindsight you heard it, you were like, oh, I would not have taken that one.
Yeah, yeah. So look, in the early days, the first year or so that we were in touch with them, it was a completely domestic oriented business, only focused on 3 or 4 categories of building materials like cement, aggregates, concrete, etc. But then, if you rewind back to the very first phase of the COVID lockdown, all construction activity in India had shut down. So obviously, that business just overnight dropped to zero, right? So in order to keep something going, they decided firstly that they will start exporting,
Mm-hmm.
and secondly, they'll start exporting in different categories. In their case, it was construction chemicals, uh, which was a twofold or two axis change, if you want to think of it, or 2 degrees of change. But they did it, and it was needed, and actually generated quite a bit of business, because at the time For those of you who might remember, overseas shipping was only restricted to what were considered essential goods, right? And other things were not allowed to be shipped in that specific phase. And interestingly, even though that was, I guess, a bold decision from a more survival perspective, that business has since evolved both as exports as well as chemicals to a very substantial part of the business. And it also provides other kinds of hedges, given us other ideas on how to launch other categories. And I think InfraMarket would not be what it is today if not for that change, which is quite fascinating.
And put it in context again, that was a time when a company like InfraMarket was overwhelmed with market change all of a sudden, right?
Yes.
I think a similar situation would have been with if you were with Flexport or another ocean freight forwarder and the Suez
Yeah.
Canal, all
Yes.
of a sudden got shut down. So that's the amount of, or the magnitude that InfraMarket was all of a sudden confronted with. So that's a bold bet, but it's also boldly executed. And that's
Yes.
important because you can kind of, it doesn't even have to be analysis paralysis, right? It sometimes is that you're not paralyzed by it, but whatever, maybe the meetings take longer to get the people on the phone. At some point, bold execution means, no, I'm taking the bet that this will work and I'm not waiting for more information. I want to do it now. I want to do a quick test. I want to run an experiment. I boldly execute it. Example from my portfolio company 2 weeks ago. This is a French fintech that I'm invested in construction tech. So they serve contractors with financing solutions. The founders revealed to me, hey, by the way, we've already sold this many types of this new product. And I was like,
Okay.
guys, time out. I thought we would launch that product in Q3. They said, yeah, we didn't want to tell our investors. We already did. We saw an opportunity a month ago to launch this quicker, and we wanted to test it. That's a bold bet, boldly executed, right? So that's a perfect example. It's not about telling your investors or not. Actually, oftentimes it will be good not to tell them. But it's about they saw a window of opportunity that originally.
Now that you have said it, people will say Patric is fully in favor of founders keeping everything to themselves.
Not everything, but some details. They are better. They are better suited to stay with the prime decision makers, and also better suited not to make the round with other venture circles. I'm a very secretive guy, as I think you can judge when you listen to Practical Nerds for a long time, but not everybody is like that. So yeah, there's that, but also boldly executed because they saw a window of opportunity open up quicker than they had originally planned. And then your mind can say, no, I want to, my priorities, and maybe I'm not quite ready to do it just yet because I wanted to hire for it. Boldly executed, right? So that's the third job. And so the reason why that third thing is a CEO job is because if you want your company to become grander, bigger, and morph into something, you cannot plan it for 10 years, Shub. It doesn't work that way. You're stacking too many assumptions. What you need to do is create options for your business. And these options, 7 out of 10 times, you will shut them down. So the bold execution part also means to then kill them boldly. But maybe 3 out of 10 times, 2, 1, it doesn't matter actually, you will now see something that works. But only by doing that, it will actually happen. And because you cannot plan it on a blueprint, how your company looks in 5 years, if you're truly a generational company, you need to create these options boldly that then tell you what could happen. Well, actually not that then happen or they don't happen. And then all of a sudden you build something bigger. It's not a PowerPoint exercise. It's an optionality exercise.
Maybe for topical reasons, one counterexample of what an opposite of not taking a bold bet or not boldly executing comes to mind from an email that, Patric, you and I read, I think it was last night or earlier this morning, from a company where I think the founder wanted to at least create the illusion or the perception that they were owning up to responsibility, turning over a new leaf, etc., etc. But correct me if I'm wrong, my reading of the situation was, I think on 4 or 5 different occasions, the explanation given was, hey, this is what my lead investor told me to do, so this is what I did, but oops, it was wrong. So shame on you, my lead investor. And there was like a recurring theme. So I'm like, hey, come on, man. I mean, how can each of those times, then you're not a founder. You're just a stooge of your investor if that's your explanation.
Oh man, that was such a yeah. Okay, so the context: the company had raised 100 million. This CEO got replaced by the lead investor. The lead investor had led 2 rounds, maybe 3 rounds
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
And certainly that investor is known as a strong character, like
Hmm.
very well-known person, strong character, but also hugely successful as an entrepreneur
Yeah.
and then later as an investor. And so this founder then sent this email to all his former shareholders after the company didn't work out. First, he got replaced as a CEO, or he framed it as, hey, I decided to take a step back as a CEO
Hmm.
because this investor suggested I do it. So, and then left the company entirely a little bit later. And now that company looks like it's not going to work out. And so he sent this email and then, yeah, was basically saying, hey, here are all the things that I screwed up that I screwed up. But here are the 5 things why my lead investor screwed up. And by the way, I'm launching a new company. You should all invest in me and I'll give you great terms. Like literally, Shub, like
Yeah.
that was the message in that email. It was quite hilarious. But yeah, that's not what bold execution looks like and
Yeah.
then being accountable for it.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, so Shub, should I do I need to send this episode to said founder to correct the record, or do you think that was good advice?
That would be quite a bold idea and probably very boldly executed by you, sir. That would be bold execution.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure if you'll achieve the second objective, that is the best use. I don't know if the primary information would tell you that is the best use of your time, but
Yeah.
hey, at least it would be bold execution.
Let me ask you something. Of the three before we wrap up here, of the 3 things,
Hmm.
2 questions. The first question: of those 3 things, what would you estimate the percentage of companies in AEC tech, let's say,
Hmm.
will have all 3?
Oh, so I presume you're asking AC Tech, right?
Yeah.
So definitely less than 1%. I would venture to say less than 0.1%.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're closer like 1 in 5,000, 1 in 10,000 than you are 1 in 1,000?
So look, it depends. I guess in this case, because I'm talking about 1 in 1,000 or more, the question I have to ask myself is how many companies fit the description of having that, and I guess also figuring out the denominator. I guess the denominator is what, a few tens of thousands of companies, I guess.
Maybe
So
20 right now. Yeah.
yeah. So the question to ask is, do we have more than 10 or more than 20 companies? Okay, I'll stick to 1 in 1,000 for now. I
Okay.
think 1 in 1,000 seems right to me.
Okay. That sounds good. So second
Hmm.
question, but by the way, I would have answered somewhat the same. I think 1 in a
Hmm.
1,000 is probably the order of magnitude. Yeah.
Yeah,
And ideally, it changes as the company matures. I mean, I'm not
correct.
looking, nobody can claim to be perfect. And
Yeah.
hopefully, great founders are not stale, right? And
Hmm.
they develop and morph as they make experiences. So it could also be that, it doesn't need new foundings to improve the 1 in 1,000. It could also be just that the crop and the vintage of founders becomes better and better.
Yes.
But second question, of the 3, which one do you think is the most impactful? And which one of the 3 do you think is the rarest?
Hmm. At early stage or later stage?
I'm going to say later stage because that's
Hmm.
where this comes really into play.
I think at later stage, the second one, that is the founder staying in touch with the primary information, I think that becomes a problem.
Uh-huh.
And I'm saying later stage, but I've seen, I think it's not an exaggeration to say that most Series B companies don't have that sorted, uh, frankly speaking. Um, at an earlier stage, At an earlier stage, I would say not everyone. Hmm. I'm vacillating between do they about hiring exceptional people and whether they know what bold execution means. Okay, you know what? I'll go for the bold execution. That is
Oh,
the rarer one.
interesting.
Yeah. What's your pick, sir?
I think the most impactful is the first one, being able
Mm.
to truly hire excellence and organize it exceptionally well. I think it's the most impactful.
Hmm.
I think they're all three rare. I would be unqualified to say which of the three is the rarest among the three. It's just, hey, I mean, I'm looking for a unicorn, a Taurus, and maybe a unicorn and a Taurus
And
to
a, and a
get morphed
cent and a
together,
cent and a centaur maybe.
and a centaur maybe. Yeah, exactly. Very mythical. But I think the most impactful one, if you don't get that right, you probably don't even get to do the other two, is the excellence organized exceptionally well.
Mm.
And you're right, that starts actually in the early years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey, thanks for having this discussion with me. It was very topical because this phone call
No,
literally happened a couple hours before we recorded.
absolutely. And thanks for sparking this discussion with this very topical anecdote.
Super. All right, sir. Well, I'll see you again on Practical Nerds very soon then.
Very soon, which is a week apart.
Yeah. Excellent. See you soon.
Yeah.
Ciao.
See ya.